Manager fired her for helping a homeless man. She didn't know he was the company's CEO, testing loyalty. Alastair Finch surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping over the polished mahogany table, the gleaming chrome accents, and the faces of the executives assembled before him. The air in the executive boardroom of Finch and Sons Textiles, a company he had built with his own two hands, thrummed with a tension that was palpable only to him. For the others, it was merely another Monday, another routine corporate meeting, perhaps a slightly longer one due to the founder's unexpected presence. But for Alastair, this was the culmination of weeks, indeed months, of meticulously planned deception, the grand unveiling of a truth long obscured by layers of corporate pretense, a truth he desperately needed to expose, not just for the company, but for his own peace of mind. He felt a quiet hum beneath his skin, a blend of nervous anticipation and grim satisfaction. The stage was set, and the players, unknowingly, were already in their places. Bradford Sterling, regional manager and a man whose ego seemed to inflate with every dollar of profit he reported, shifted impatiently in his seat. A self-satisfied smirk played on his lips, a familiar expression that Alastair had come to associate with a profound lack of insight, a blindness to anything beyond the quarterly numbers. Bradford, ever eager to assert his dominance and subtly mock the old ways, caught Alastair's eye and offered a condescending, almost patronizing nod. His silver hair, usually impeccably slicked back, seemed to gleam under the fluorescent lights, a stark reflection of his polished, yet hollow, corporate persona. "Well, Alastair," he began, his voice dripping with forced cordiality that barely concealed his disdain for the company's reclusive founder. "It's certainly an unexpected pleasure to have you grace us with your presence. We were beginning to wonder if you'd ever emerge from your retirement." A soft chuckle rippled through the room, a cautious acknowledgement of Bradford's implied jibe, a ripple of complicity or, at best, indifference. They all knew Alastair had retreated from daily operations, leaving the reins to men like Bradford, men who promised efficiency and growth, men who spoke a language Alastair felt was rapidly losing its humanity. He saw a few glances exchanged, a subtle shift in postures, confirming his long-held suspicion that many of them had come to view him as an anachronism, a benevolent but ultimately irrelevant figurehead. Alastair's expression remained unreadable, a calm sea concealing a brewing storm. He allowed a beat of silence to hang in the air, letting Bradford's casual insolence fester. He observed the slight discomfort of a few younger executives, perhaps those not yet fully corrupted by the pervasive culture, though their apprehension was fleeting, quickly overshadowed by Bradford's overbearing confidence. The irony was thick enough to taste, a bitter tang on his tongue. These were the men who believed they were shaping the future of Finch and Sons, yet they were utterly blind to the reality unfolding before them, a reality he had meticulously crafted, a trap he had laid with agonizing precision. He had watched them for too long, seen their reports, listened to their presentations, and realized it was all a carefully constructed illusion. "Retirement, Bradford?" Alastair finally spoke, his voice surprisingly robust for a man of his years, carrying a quiet authority that instantly silenced the murmurs and drew every eye to him. The air seemed to crackle with his unstated command. "One might say I was merely conducting a very important field study." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly, no longer on Bradford's smirking face, but seemingly looking through him, past him, into the very soul of the company. A shiver went down his spine, not of cold, but of a quiet, righteous anger. "And I am pleased, or perhaps, deeply saddened, to report that my study is now complete." Bradford's smirk wavered, replaced by a flicker of mild confusion, then a hint of genuine unease. He straightened in his chair, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, though he couldn't quite pinpoint its origin. He probably dismissed it as an old man's eccentricity, a final, rambling pronouncement. "A study, sir? Perhaps you could enlighten us?" His tone was still laced with an irritating blend of mock deference and genuine dismissal, a barely concealed impatience to move on to the real agenda. Alastair knew he was entirely convinced that Alastair Finch, the old man, was nothing more than a figurehead, a relic of a bygone era, now prone to eccentric pronouncements. He was about to learn just how wrong he was, and Alistair felt a chilling sense of inevitability. Alistair's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile, a smile that held no warmth, only the chilling certainty of impending judgment. It was a smile of a man who held all the cards, who had seen the game played out, and knew the precise, devastating outcome. "Oh, I assure you, Bradford," he said, his voice dropping slightly, now imbued with a steeliness that sent a shiver down the spines of a few more perceptive executives, those who sensed the true weight of his words. "I intend to enlighten all of you. Because, as of this moment, the game is over. The test has concluded. And the results, I'm afraid, are precisely what I feared, and precisely what I needed to see." Bradford scoffed, a nervous, dismissive sound, still oblivious, still mocking, still trapped in his self-important bubble. He had no idea the grand stage was set, and he was about to play the role of the fool in a drama orchestrated by the man he so casually disdained. Alistair felt a deep, almost painful satisfaction at the realization that the man who epitomized everything he had come to despise about the company's new direction was about to face his reckoning. Alistair Finch had built Finch & Sons Textiles from a modest family enterprise into a national powerhouse. He often reminisced about the early days, the scent of fresh cotton and raw wool, the rhythmic hum of the looms in the small factory his father had started. His father, a humble weaver with calloused hands and a keen eye for quality, had instilled in him the values of meticulous craftsmanship and honest dealings. Alistair, in turn, had woven these principles into the very fabric of his company. Integrity was not just a buzzword to be printed on annual reports, it was the thread that held everything together, the very warp and weft of Finch & Sons. Compassion for employees, fairness to suppliers, and genuine care for customers were not merely ideals but cornerstones of his business philosophy. He believed a company thrived not just on profit margins, though he understood their necessity, but on the trust and loyalty it cultivated, the human connections it fostered. He had walked the factory floors countless times, knew his employees by name, understood their families and their struggles, and had often personally resolved customer grievances, understanding that a true relationship with the consumer, built on trust and a willingness to listen, was invaluable, irreplaceable. Those were the foundations, solid and true. Yet, as the decades passed and the company expanded, growing from a regional success to a national chain, Alistair had felt a creeping unease, a subtle but persistent chill. The vibrant, human pulse of Finch & Sons seemed to be fading, replaced by the cold, calculating rhythm of quarterly reports and market share percentages, a soulless pursuit of numbers. He had entrusted the daily operations to a new generation of executives, bright young men and women who spoke eloquently of synergy and optimization, of leveraging assets and disruptive innovation, but rarely of service or empathy, or the simple act of listening to a customer's needs. He had watched from a distance, a benevolent patriarch, but his observations had become increasingly disturbing, a slow erosion of everything he had built. Complaints, once rare occurrences handled directly and personally, now trickled in with alarming regularity through automated systems and impersonal customer service lines. Customers reported aggressive sales tactics, a lack of genuine assistance, and a feeling of being merely a transaction, a number on a screen. Employee morale, once a source of deep pride and competitive advantage, seemed to be plummeting, replaced by a pervasive anxiety about meeting targets and adhering to rigid corporate policies that stifled initiative and humanity. Alistair would occasionally visit stores incognito, or simply linger in the periphery, observing from a shadowed corner, and what he witnessed often chilled him to the bone. He saw sales associates, once encouraged to build rapport and truly understand a customer's needs, now rushing patrons, their eyes fixed on their commission screens, their smiles brittle and forced. He overheard managers berating staff for perceived inefficiencies, crushing their spirit rather than nurturing it, fostering an environment of fear instead of collaboration. He saw the gleam of the chrome, the polish of the mahogany, but he no longer felt the warmth of the human touch. The primary catalyst for his deepening disillusionment was Bradford Sterling. Bradford had joined Finch & Sons a decade prior, a young, ambitious MBA graduate with a razor-sharp mind for numbers and an almost pathological disregard for anything that couldn't be quantified on a spreadsheet. He was a protege of the outgoing CEO, whom Alastair had always respected but who, in his later years, had grown too comfortable with the new business models. Bradford had risen through the ranks with dizzying speed, his ruthless efficiency impressing those who valued output above all else, regardless of the human cost. He was a master of corporate jargon, speaking of lean operations and maximizing stakeholder value while subtly dismantling the very human infrastructure Alastair had painstakingly built, piece by painful piece. Bradford viewed empathy as a weakness, compassion as an inefficiency, and customer service as a cost center, something to be minimized or outsourced. For him, a homeless person near the store entrance was not a human being in need, but a blight on the corporate image, a potential deterrent to affluent shoppers, a problem to be eradicated. He once heard Bradford openly dismiss a long-standing employee's suggestion for a community outreach program, scoffing, "What's the ROI on charity, old man? We're a business, not a soup kitchen." Alastair had tried, gently at first, to reinstill his values. He had sent memos, requested reports on employee well-being initiatives, and even made surprise visits, attempting to reignite the fading spark. But these efforts were met with polite platitudes and superficial adjustments, quickly reverting to the old ways once his attention was diverted. He realized that the rot was deeper than he had initially thought. His executives, particularly Bradford, had become adept at presenting a polished facade, a perfectly manicured garden, while beneath, the company's soul was slowly being eroded by a toxic weed of greed and indifference. They reported what he wanted to hear, not what was true. They had mastered the art of illusion, and he, the founder, had become their unwitting audience. One particularly galling incident solidified his resolve, turning his quiet unease into a burning conviction. An elderly woman, a longtime customer named Mrs. Eleanor Vance, who remembered him from his younger days, had called him personally, somehow getting his unlisted number, a testament to her tenacity and desperation. She tearfully recounted how she had been brusquely dismissed by a young manager, a manager Bradford had personally trained, when she sought help with a faulty product, despite having her receipt and the item's warranty. She spoke of the manager's cold eyes, his condescending tone, and her feeling of being utterly insignificant, a burden, a mere annoyance. Alastair had intervened, of course, resolving the issue himself, personally delivering a replacement and a heartfelt apology, but the incident gnawed at him. How many others had been treated similarly, driven away by the company he had poured his life into? How many loyal customers had been lost, their trust irrevocably broken? He suspected that this wasn't an isolated incident, but rather symptomatic of a systemic problem, a disease that had spread silently through the corporate bloodstream. He needed to see beyond the corporate reports, past the staged smiles and practiced politeness, past the carefully crafted lies. He needed to witness raw, unfiltered human interaction within his own company. And to do that, he realized, he had to become invisible, insignificant, and utterly vulnerable. He had to strip away his identity as the revered founder and become someone entirely opposite, someone who would elicit genuine, uncalculated reactions from the very people he sought to test. The idea of disguising himself as a homeless man began as a fleeting, almost absurd thought, then blossomed into a meticulously crafted plan, a painful but necessary metamorphosis. He knew it would be uncomfortable, perhaps even humiliating, a stark contrast to the life of luxury he normally led. But the stakes were too high. His legacy, the very soul of Finch and Sons, depended on it. He spent weeks preparing. He sourced old, tattered clothing that wouldn't draw too much attention but clearly indicated destitution, the kind of clothing one would pass by without a second glance. He practiced walking with a slight stoop, observing the mannerisms of those living on the streets, the way they held themselves, the subtle shifts in their gaze, the defensive posture born of constant scrutiny and dismissal, the way they made themselves small to avoid confrontation. He let his usually immaculately trimmed silver beard grow wild, and allowed his usually sharp, intelligent eyes to adopt a weary, almost vacant look, the dullness of despair. He even went as far as to smudge dirt onto his hands and face, and to ensure a faint, unwashed odor clung to his clothes, a deliberate assault on his own senses. It was a painful transformation, forcing him to confront the societal prejudices he hoped to expose, to experience a sliver of the indignity he knew many endured daily. He knew that if his own employees could look past the rags and see the human being within, then there was still hope for Finch and Sons. If not, then a radical surgical intervention would be required. He wanted to know who truly embodied the values he had instilled, and who merely paid them lip service, empty words on a corporate banner. The morning of the test dawned cold and gray, mirroring the apprehension and grim determination in Alistair's heart. He stood before a cracked mirror in a dingy rented room on the outskirts of the city, the final touches of his disguise complete. The man staring back was almost unrecognizable, a 72-year-old patriarch transformed into a disheveled, elderly vagrant. His usually keen eyes were now clouded with a carefully cultivated weariness, his proud posture replaced by a defeated slump. He carried a worn, empty canvas bag, his only prop, a symbol of his assumed destitution. He felt a profound sense of isolation as he stepped out onto the bustling city streets, instantly becoming invisible to the hurried commuters, a mere shadow in the urban landscape, an inconvenient obstacle to be skirted around. He noted how people instinctively averted their gaze, clutching their bags closer, accelerating their pace. This was the first part of his test, to truly become unseen. His chosen target was the flagship Finch and Sons textile store, a gleaming edifice of glass and steel that symbolized the company's modern prosperity, its facade reflecting the cold, hard ambition he sought to expose. It was a place where Bradford Sterling frequently held court, overseeing operations with an iron fist disguised in a velvet glove, a place he considered his personal domain. As Alistair shuffled towards the entrance, he was struck by the stark contrast between his appearance and the pristine, almost clinical perfection of the store. The display windows showcased luxurious fabrics and impeccably dressed mannequins, an opulent world that seemed to actively repel someone like him, an unspoken barrier. He positioned himself near the entrance, leaning against a cold stone pillar, attempting to appear harmless, just another fixture of the street, easy to ignore. The biting wind carried the scent of freshly brewed coffee from a nearby cafe, a stark reminder of simple comforts he could no longer afford to openly enjoy, a luxury he had deliberately denied himself for this purpose. He watched as impeccably dressed customers glided past, their gazes sliding over him as if he were part of the inanimate scenery. A few hurried glances, a tightening of handbags, a subtle detour, these were the only acknowledgments he received from the general public. He had expected this, understood it as the cruel reality of urban anonymity. What he sought was the reaction of his own people, those who, by their very employment, were supposed to embody the values he had instilled. The first employee Alistair observed was a young security guard, perched by the automatic doors, his expression one of bored vigilance, a man clearly following a protocol. The guard's eyes flickered towards Alistair, lingered for a moment, then moved on, a silent assessment. There was no direct confrontation, no immediate request to leave, just a silent, implied warning, a subtle shift in his stance. The message was clear, *you're seen, but you're not welcome. Stay on the periphery. Alistair understood this subtle tactic, a form of soft deterrence, likely instructed by management to maintain the store's image, to sanitize its exterior. He felt a familiar pang of disappointment, a quiet confirmation of his fears. Then, the doors swished open, and Bradford Sterling emerged, impeccably tailored in a charcoal suit that shimmered with understated luxury, his silver hair slicked back with an almost unnatural perfection. He held a high-end smartphone to his ear, his voice booming with the kind of self-important authority that grated on Alistair's nerves, a voice that carried too far, too loud. "Yes, absolutely, Mr. Henderson. Quarterly projections are looking incredibly strong. We're on track to exceed targets by a significant margin. No room for sentimentality, purely data-driven decisions. Efficiency is king, Mr. Henderson, efficiency is king." He laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. Bradford paused, his call momentarily interrupted as his eyes landed on Alistair, slumped against the pillar, a perceived blight on his perfect morning. The smirk that usually graced his lips vanished, replaced by a look of undisguised contempt, a sudden hardening of his features. His face contorted, a muscle in his jaw twitching with irritation. He lowered his phone, his gaze fixed on the old man, as if Alistair were a particularly offensive stain on his otherwise perfect day, a piece of refuse that had dared to intrude on his carefully curated world. "You!" Bradford barked, his voice sharp and accusatory, instantly drawing the attention of passers-by and a security guard. "What do you think you're doing loitering here? This is private property. You're scaring away customers. We don't tolerate vagrancy here." His words were a public performance, a display of power. Alistair looked up slowly, feigning confusion and a touch of fear, a convincing portrayal of a man broken by circumstance. He mumbled something incoherent, a quiet, almost pleading sound designed to elicit either pity or further aggression, to gauge the depth of the man's callousness. He felt the cold seeping into his bones, but it was the coldness of the human heart, not the weather, that truly chilled him. Bradford, however, was clearly not in the mood for either. He strode towards Alistair, his expensive shoes clicking sharply on the pavement, each step a declaration of his disdain. "I don't care what you're mumbling. Get up. You're a nuisance. This is Finch and Sons Textiles, not a public shelter. Do you understand? Your presence is unprofessional and frankly, disgusting." He gestured dismissively with his hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly, a gesture of absolute contempt. "Security! Get this man out of here immediately. And if he doesn't comply, call the police. I won't have this kind of element tarnishing our brand image." The security guard, now galvanized by Bradford's direct order, began to move towards Alistair, his expression grim, caught between duty and a flicker of discomfort. Alistair allowed a flicker of fear to cross his face, his heart aching with a bitterness he had rarely known. This was his company, his legacy, and this man, this execrable man, was shaming a vulnerable individual, an elderly man, in public, simply for existing near his domain. The words cut deeper than any physical blow. Disgusting, Bradford had called him. The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in Alistair's mouth. Bradford had no idea the disgusting man before him was the very foundation of his opulent life, the architect of the empire he now so carelessly commanded. Just as the security guard reached Alistair, a quiet voice cut through the harshness of Bradford's tirade, a voice that carried a surprising strength. "Mr. Sterling, please." Alistair looked up. A woman stood in the doorway, a sales associate he recognized vaguely from his brief visits, a familiar face from the old days, from a time when Finch and Sons felt more like a family. Her name, he recalled, was Gwendolyn Price. She was not young, perhaps in her late 50s, her uniform neat but clearly well worn, a testament to years of diligent service. Her hair was pulled back simply, and her face, though lined with age and perhaps worry, held an undeniable warmth in her eyes, a flicker of genuine human concern. She carried a small lunch bag and a thermos, prepared for her midday break. Gwendolyn hurried forward, her gaze apologetic towards Alistair, but firm as she addressed Bradford. "Sir, he's not doing any harm. He's just sitting there. He looks cold." Her voice was soft, barely a whisper against Bradford's booming command, but there was an unexpected steel beneath its gentle surface, a quiet defiance born of principle. Bradford whirled on her, his face contorted in a mask of fury, his patience completely gone. "Gwendolyn! Are you defying a direct order? This is a store, not a charity. His presence reflects poorly on the brand. Get back inside and do your job, or I'll find someone who will. I pay you to sell textiles, not to coddle vagrants." Gwendolyn flinched slightly at his harshness, her shoulders tensing, but her resolve didn't waver. She glanced at Alistair, seeing the weary slump of his shoulders, the hunger in his eyes, the visible tremor of cold. She saw a fellow human being, not a nuisance, not a blight, but someone in obvious need. Her heart, Alistair observed, was clearly larger than Bradford's entire corporate strategy, more valuable than any profit margin. "But sir, it's freezing out here," Gwendolyn pleaded, her voice barely a whisper, yet brave in its defiance. She knelt slowly beside Alistair, a gesture of profound respect and humility that brought a lump to his throat, a gesture that spoke volumes. She opened her lunch bag, revealing a simple sandwich wrapped in cling film, and unscrewed the top of her thermos. Steam rose gently from the warm liquid within, a comforting scent. "Here," she said softly, extending the thermos towards Alistair. "It's just hot tea. It'll warm you up a little." Then, she offered him the sandwich. "And I made an extra one today. Please, take it." Her eyes pleaded with him to accept. Alistair looked at the offered items, then at Gwendolyn's kind, worried face. Her fingers, he noticed, were slightly chapped, perhaps from manual labor or the cold. Her uniform, though clean, was a standard-issue polyester blend, far from the luxurious fabric sold within. He knew, intuitively, that this small gesture was a sacrifice for her, that her lunch was likely meager, perhaps the only substantial meal she would have that day. Yet, she offered it without hesitation, without expectation of reward, purely out of compassion, a pure, unadulterated act of human decency. It was the flicker of light he had sought, the faint pulse of the company's true heart. "Gwendolyn!" Bradford's voice boomed again, laced with incandescent rage, a raw, uncontrolled fury. "That's it. You're finished. Pack your things and leave. You're a liability to this company. We have no place for employees who undermine authority and prioritize vagrants over our brand image. You're terminated, effective immediately." Gwendolyn recoiled, her face paling, her eyes widening in shock, but she didn't immediately withdraw her hand. Her eyes, filled with unshed tears, met Alistair's. A silent apology seemed to pass between them, a lament for the harshness of the world, a recognition of shared vulnerability. Alistair slowly, deliberately, reached out and took the thermos and the sandwich. His fingers brushed against hers, and he felt the genuine warmth of her skin, a warmth that contrasted sharply with the coldness of Bradford's words, the coldness that had permeated the very air around them. "Thank you," Alistair mumbled, his voice hoarse, allowing a tear to well in his eye, a tear born not of sorrow for his predicament, but of profound gratitude and vindication. This was it. This was the moment. He had found what he was looking for. He had seen the callous disregard of a man driven by greed and image, and he had witnessed the pure, selfless kindness of a woman who still understood the true meaning of humanity. He had seen the heart of Finch and Sons, still beating, albeit faintly, within Gwendolyn Price. Bradford, still fuming, turned to the security guard. "Escort them both out. Now. And call the police if he resists." Alistair, still holding the warm tea and the sandwich, pushed himself up slowly, his body aching, but his spirit soaring. He met Bradford's furious gaze, and for a fleeting moment, allowed a flicker of his true self to show in his eyes, a flash of sharp intelligence, a hint of steel, a depth of knowing that transcended his disguise. It was enough to make Bradford pause, a momentary tremor of uneasy confusion passing through him, though he quickly dismissed it as the senility of an old man, a trick of the light. Alistair then turned and shuffled away, his disguise still firmly in place, but his heart filled with a renewed purpose, a blazing conviction. He had his answer. Finch and Sons had a soul worth saving, and he knew exactly who would help him save it. The atmosphere in the grand conference hall of Finch and Sons Textiles was thick with anticipation. Alistair Finch had called an emergency all-hands meeting, something unheard of in recent memory, a summons that had sent ripples of speculation through every department. Whispers had circulated for days, fueled by his sudden re-emergence from his self-imposed semi-retirement. The executives, from various departments and regional branches, sat in plush chairs, their faces a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and, in Bradford Sterling's case, smug self-satisfaction. Bradford, believing Alistair to be an old fool making a final, sentimental appearance, had been confidently spreading rumors that the founder was merely making a grand gesture before handing over full control, perhaps even naming him as his successor, cementing his power. He had dressed for the occasion, his expensive suit immaculate, his posture radiating an air of expectant triumph, a man on the cusp of his greatest achievement. He had imagined his own name being announced, the applause, the quiet envy of his peers. Gwendolyn Price was also present, seated discreetly near the back, clutching her hands in her lap. She had received a bewildering summons to attend, told only that her exemplary service warranted her presence at a significant company announcement. She felt utterly out of place among the high-ranking executives, her simple sales associate uniform a stark contrast to their tailored suits and expensive watches. Her mind was still reeling from the past few days. She had been summarily dismissed by Bradford, her livelihood threatened, but then, mysteriously, a call from Alastair Finch's personal assistant had reinstated her, with instructions to ignore Bradford's termination and to attend this very meeting. She hadn't understood any of it, the abrupt swings of fate, but she was grateful to still have her job, even if a dark cloud of uncertainty still loomed over her, a quiet fear that this reprieve was only temporary. Alastair entered the hall, not from a side door, but through the main entrance, walking slowly, deliberately, radiating an almost regal authority, a man who commanded respect without uttering a single word. He was impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit that spoke of quiet power rather than ostentatious wealth, a suit that fit him like a second skin. His silver hair was neatly combed, his beard trimmed, returning to its former distinguished appearance. His eyes, no longer dulled by pretense, gleamed with an unnerving intensity, sweeping over every face in the room, pausing for a fraction of a second on each, as if assessing their very souls. He walked past Bradford, who offered a confident, almost condescending nod, a self-satisfied smile, oblivious to the storm brewing, still lost in his delusions of grandeur. Alastair did not acknowledge him, his gaze fixed on the podium. He took his place at the podium, a single spotlight illuminating him, casting long shadows behind him. The silence in the room became absolute, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning, a palpable tension. Alastair surveyed the expectant faces, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, a smile of quiet victory. This was it. The moment of truth. "Good morning," Alastair's voice resonated, calm and clear, filling the vast hall, each word perfectly articulated. "I apologize for the sudden nature of this meeting, but there are matters of utmost importance that demand our immediate attention." He paused, letting his gaze rest for a moment on Bradford, who shifted uncomfortably, a flicker of irritation crossing his face, impatient to get to what he presumed was his moment of glory. "Many of you have wondered why I have been less involved in the daily operations of Finch and Sons recently. Some have even speculated about my intentions, my health, my very sanity." A few nervous titters could be heard, quickly stifled, as a ripple of unease spread through the room. "Allow me to clarify." Alastair walked to the edge of the podium, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate, more chilling, carrying a gravitas that made every ear strain to listen. "For months, I have observed. I have listened. And what I have seen, what I have heard, has filled me with a profound sense of dismay. The values upon which Finch and Sons was built, integrity, compassion, genuine human connection, a profound respect for every individual, whether employee or customer, seem to have been diluted. Replaced by a relentless pursuit of profit, a cold efficiency that overlooks the very essence of what makes this company great, its people. We have, it seems, forgotten who we are." Bradford scoffed audibly, a sound of dismissive impatience, unable to contain his arrogance. "Sir, with all due respect, our profit margins have never been higher. Our stock is performing exceptionally. These are hardly signs of decline. We are thriving, thanks to modern leadership." He emphasized the last words, a thinly veiled swipe at Alastair's old-fashioned principles. Alastair cut him off, his voice suddenly sharp, slicing through Bradford's interjection like a razor, the force of it making Bradford jump. "Silence, Bradford. My test," Alastair stated, his voice gaining momentum, filling the hall, "involved me stepping out of my office, out of my home, and indeed, out of my very identity. I shed my expensive clothes, my title, my reputation, my carefully constructed life. I disguised myself as someone society often chooses to ignore, to dismiss, to treat with contempt, someone who is usually invisible to men like yourselves. I became a homeless man. A gasp echoed through the room, a collective intake of breath. Faces paled. Bradford's smug expression froze, replaced by an expression of utter disbelief, then dawning horror. He vaguely remembered the incident outside his store, the old vagrant he had so cruelly shamed, the one he had just terminated an employee over. It couldn't be. It simply couldn't be. His mind raced, desperately trying to construct an alternative reality. Alistair's gaze locked onto Bradford, a silent, piercing accusation. On a particularly cold morning, just a few days ago, I visited our flagship store, the very bastion of our brand image, the place you are so proud to manage. I leaned against a pillar, shivering, my clothes tattered, my face grimed. I watched. And I observed. He paused, letting the implications sink in, letting the full weight of his revelation crush Bradford's composure. Bradford was visibly trembling now, his face draining of all color, a pasty gray. He tried to speak, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out, only a choked sound. He looked around frantically, but the shocked faces of his colleagues offered no solace, only shared horror, shared condemnation. I observed a regional manager, Alistair continued, his voice now laced with ice, each word a hammer blow, who, rather than showing a shred of human decency, publicly shamed an elderly, seemingly destitute man. He ordered him away, threatened security, and called him disgusting. He saw not a human being in need, but a blight on his pristine corporate image, an inconvenience to be removed. That manager, Bradford, was you. The accusation hung heavy in the air, a hammer blow to Bradford's carefully constructed facade, shattering it into a million pieces. He slumped in his chair, utterly defeated, his eyes wide with terror and disbelief. His entire world was crashing down around him, the opulent life, the career, the carefully cultivated image, all gone in an instant. But then, Alistair's voice softened, a warmth returning to his tone, a profound gratitude evident in his gaze. I observed something else. Something that reminded me why I built Finch and Sons in the first place, why I poured my life's blood into it. A sales associate, witnessing this cruelty, this utter disregard for human dignity, defied direct orders. She risked her job, her livelihood, her very future, to offer a warm drink and a sandwich from her own lunch to a man she believed was utterly destitute, a man she saw as simply cold and hungry. She saw a fellow human being. Alistair turned his gaze towards the back of the room, towards Gwendolyn Price, who was now weeping silently, overwhelmed by the revelation, tears streaming down her face, a mixture of shock, relief, and profound emotion. Gwendolyn Price, he said, his voice filled with profound respect, echoing through the hall, you are the true heart of this company. You are the embodiment of the values I hold dear. You saw a human being, not a statistic, not a nuisance, not a threat. You saw a fellow soul in need, and you acted with unparalleled kindness, with pure, unadulterated compassion. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle upon the room. The executive stared, some with shame, some with awe, all with a newfound understanding of the man who stood before them. The old man, the eccentric founder, was not a relic. He was a force of nature, a judge, and a redeemer, a man who had chosen to walk among them, unseen, to expose their truths. Bradford Sterling, Alistair declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority, silencing any lingering whispers, your services to Finch and Sons Textiles are no longer required. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. You have proven yourself utterly devoid of the empathy and integrity that are fundamental to this company's ethos, the very fabric of its being. Furthermore, I will personally ensure that your lack of character is well documented within the industry, a cautionary tale for all who prioritize profit over people. Bradford could only stare, his mouth agape, his carefully constructed career shattered in an instant by the very man he had dismissed as a senile old fool. He tried to rise, perhaps to protest, but his legs wouldn't hold him. The irony, Alistair knew, was exquisite. The mask was off. the truth was laid bare. And the consequences, for everyone in that room, were about to be profound, a seismic shift in the corporate landscape. The aftermath of Alastair's thunderous revelation was swift and merciless. The carefully controlled corporate environment of Finch and Sons fractured, revealing the raw consequences of moral bankruptcy and selfless compassion. It was a dramatic, almost theatrical purging, but one Alastair felt was long overdue, a necessary surgical intervention to excise the rot. Bradford Sterling's world imploded with a speed that left him reeling, a dizzying descent from the pinnacle of his self-made success. A team of security personnel, seemingly materialized out of nowhere, quietly but firmly escorted him from the conference hall even before Alastair had finished his next sentence, a final, humiliating exit. His protests were choked, his face a grotesque mask of shock, humiliation, and impotent rage. The once smug regional manager, who had reveled in his power and dismissed others with a sneer, was now a public spectacle of disgrace, his downfall a stark lesson for all present. Alastair's instructions were clear and uncompromising. Bradford was to be given no severance, no glowing recommendations, and his corporate email and access were to be revoked immediately, his digital existence erased. The news of his spectacular downfall would spread like wildfire through the industry, a cautionary tale of hubris and cruelty, ensuring that no reputable firm would ever consider hiring him. His meticulously built career, founded on ruthless ambition and a profound lack of empathy, crumbled into dust. The lavish lifestyle he had so carefully cultivated, the designer suits, the luxury cars, the exclusive club memberships, the sprawling suburban mansion, all now felt like an elaborate stage set, suddenly stripped bare, revealing the hollowness and emptiness beneath. Alastair allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction, noting how quickly the mighty could fall when their foundations were built on sand, not on substance. Bradford, who once measured his success in cold, hard numbers, would now find his worth measured in the emptiness of his disgraced reputation, the chilling silence of lost connections. Other executives, those who had turned a blind eye to Bradford's excesses, or even enabled them through their silence or complicity, felt the icy chill of Alastair's gaze. Some were quietly demoted, their responsibilities reduced, their paths to advancement abruptly halted. Others were put on strict probation, given a stark choice: embrace the company's core values and participate in its renewal, or face similar consequences. Alastair made it clear that a complete cultural overhaul was underway, a return to the foundational principles, and those unwilling to adapt, unwilling to reconnect with the human element of the business, would find themselves outside the new Finch and Sons. The air in the executive suites, once thick with self-importance and a detached pursuit of profit, was now tinged with a newfound humility, a palpable fear, and a dawning understanding of the true cost of their previous indifference. Alastair felt a quiet resolve that this transformation would not be superficial, it would be deep and lasting. Meanwhile, Gwendolyn Price, still tear-streaked and trembling, found herself ushered to the front of the hall by Alastair's assistant. She stood before Alastair, utterly bewildered, her mind struggling to process the seismic shift that had just occurred. She had not dared to dream of such a turn of events, not in her wildest fantasies. Her life had been a quiet struggle, a series of modest triumphs and persistent challenges, providing for her ailing mother. She had worked diligently for decades, often sacrificing her own needs for the sake of others, her small sales associate's salary barely enough to cover the mounting medical bills and household expenses. Her small act of kindness had been just that, a small, human gesture in a moment of observed cruelty, entirely uncalculated, born purely of compassion. Alastair, his voice now imbued with warmth and profound gratitude, addressed her directly, for all the executives to witness, a public acknowledgement of true worth. "Gwendolyn," he began, his voice surprisingly gentle, a soothing balm after the storm, "your act of compassion, your courage to defy an unjust authority, your unwavering commitment to human decency, has shown me that the true spirit of Finch and Sons still lives. You are the embodiment of integrity, a beacon of kindness in a world that often overlooks it, a shining example of what this company should be." Gwendolyn's eyes welled up again, this time with a mix of disbelief and overwhelming emotion, a wave of relief washing over her. for your unwavering commitment to human decency, and for reminding me of the very principles upon which I built this company," Alastair continued, his voice rising slightly, ensuring every person in the room heard. "I am making you a formal offer. Firstly, you are immediately promoted to the newly created position of Director of Employee and Customer Relations. You will report directly to me, and your primary role will be to ensure that empathy, kindness, and genuine service are at the forefront of every interaction within Finch & Sons, from the factory floor to the customer service desk, from the executive boardroom to the sales floor. You will be my right hand in restoring the company's soul." A gasp rippled through the room. A sales associate, directly reporting to the founder, overseeing entire departments, shaping corporate policy? It was unprecedented, a true revolution. Secondly, Alastair said, a soft smile gracing his lips as he saw Gwendolyn's stunned expression, her face a mixture of shock and dawning hope, "as a token of my personal gratitude, and as a recognition of the invaluable insight you brought to my own understanding, I am establishing a trust in your name. This trust will provide you with a substantial sum, enough to ensure your mother's comfort, to clear any financial burdens you may have, and to secure your future. Consider it a down payment on a new life, a home of your own, free from worry, a life where you can continue to embody the kindness you so effortlessly showed." Gwendolyn's knees buckled slightly. She staggered, caught by a sympathetic executive nearby, one of the younger ones who had watched the entire scene with a growing sense of awe. The tears flowed freely now, not just of relief, but of profound shock and overwhelming gratitude, tears that cleansed years of silent struggle. A life of quiet self-sacrifice, of constantly putting others first, was suddenly, miraculously, transformed. The weight of years of financial strain, of caring for her family on a modest salary, lifted from her shoulders in an instant. She looked at Alastair, unable to speak, only able to nod, her heart overflowing, a silent promise to uphold the trust he had placed in her. She had not sought reward, had never even considered it, but reward had found her, a testament to the universal truth that sometimes, the greatest treasures are found when least expected, in the purest acts of giving, in the simple, profound choice to be kind. Months later, the new Finch & Sons Textiles began to emerge, slowly but surely, from the ashes of its corporate cynicism. Alastair Finch, having reasserted his authority with a quiet but firm hand, oversaw a sweeping transformation that touched every aspect of the company. Training programs were revamped to emphasize empathy and problem-solving over aggressive sales quotas. Employee wellness initiatives were introduced, including expanded benefits and mental health support, creating an environment where staff felt valued, not just as cogs in a machine, but as human beings. A new culture of open communication and genuine support began to flourish, replacing the fear and anxiety that had permeated the old structure. Customer satisfaction scores, once a cold metric on a spreadsheet, now reflected genuine connections and positive experiences, driven by employees who felt empowered to truly help. Alastair found a deep peace in this work, the quiet satisfaction of seeing his legacy restored, its soul reclaimed, watching the values he held dear take root and blossom once more. He often mused on the irony. He had built an empire, but it took becoming a nobody, shedding his identity and privilege, to truly see its worth, and its flaws, to understand what truly mattered. Gwendolyn Price, once a humble sales associate, thrived in her new role as Director of Employee and Customer Relations. Her innate kindness, once seen as a weakness by men like Bradford, became her greatest strength, her guiding principle. She approached her duties with a blend of humility and unwavering determination, listening to employees' concerns with a patient ear, mediating disputes with a gentle hand, and ensuring that customer service became a genuine act of care, not a performative duty. She was instrumental in shaping the company's new direction, a living embodiment of its renewed values, a constant reminder that humanity belonged at the core of their business. Her mother, cared for in a comfortable, modern home purchased by the trust Alastair had established, regained a measure of health and happiness, her final years filled with peace. Gwendolyn herself, no longer burdened by financial stress, radiated a quiet joy, her life transformed beyond anything she had ever dared to dream, proving that generosity could indeed create miracles. She was, in many ways, the true heir to Alistair's philosophical legacy, a testament to the idea that true wealth lay not in material possessions, but in the richness of one's character, the depth of one's compassion. As for Bradford Sterling, his once promising career evaporated like mist in the morning sun. His reputation, shattered by Alistair's public condemnation and the swift, brutal consequences that followed, preceded him wherever he went. Doors that once flew open for him now remained firmly shut, his name whispered as a cautionary tale in boardrooms across the industry. He struggled to find any meaningful employment, his ruthless ambition now seen as a liability, his name synonymous with corporate ruthlessness and a shocking lack of human decency. The luxury car was repossessed, the expensive suits sold for a fraction of their worth, his grand mansion foreclosed upon. He was forced to confront the stark reality that the numbers he had so worshipped could not buy him integrity, or redeem a character devoid of compassion. His downfall served as a silent, yet potent, reminder to anyone who heard his story: what goes around, truly does come around, and a foundation built on greed and indifference is destined to crumble. In the end, Alistair Finch had found his answer. He had discovered that even in the darkest corners of corporate ambition, where numbers threatened to eclipse humanity, the light of human kindness could still shine. He had proven that true character is not defined by titles or wealth, but by the choices one makes when no one is watching, or, ironically, when everyone is watching but cannot see past the surface. It is in the willingness to extend a hand to the downtrodden, to defy injustice, to choose empathy over efficiency, that the true measure of a person is revealed. And as the story of Alistair, Bradford, and Gwendolen echoed through the revitalized halls of Finch and Sons and beyond, it served as a timeless lesson, that while the world may often seem to reward the ruthless, kindness, integrity, and genuine compassion, like seeds sown in good soil, will always, in the fullness of time, yield the most abundant and meaningful harvest, a legacy far richer and more enduring than any mere profit margin. If you enjoyed this powerful story of loyalty, betrayal, and unexpected kindness, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next tale of justice and redemption. What was your favorite moment in Alistair's incredible test? Did Bradford's downfall feel truly deserved, and were you surprised by Gwendolen's reward? Have you ever seen someone's true colors revealed in an unexpected way? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We love hearing from you.